The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here. Dan is out of state this evening, so he won't be here, but I'm very happy to be joined by Professor Jim Simmons from UW-Oshkosh, and we're going to talk during this segment anyway about the election that was just held a couple of days ago. We're taping this 2 days after the spring election, and so Jim's going to kind of do an analysis of the election, kind of a wrap-up for us. So welcome, thanks for being here.
Well,
we appreciate
anytime.
It's a small number of people in this room tonight, just you and I. So but we can make do. Well, you know, the election for me was a little bit surprising in some respects, and then some of the races wasn't a surprise at all. The things that surprised me, I guess, the most were the referendums passing by the margin that they did. I kind of expected the Oakland one to pass, but I was happy to see it pass the way it did. Fox Valley Tech, on the other hand, that passed by a 2-to-1 margin too, and that one surprised me because it was obviously a substantially greater amount of money, albeit spread out over a number of counties. But I didn't think they did a very good job at all of selling their message and telling their story, and I guess that's why I was surprised that it passed by such a wide margin. So maybe we can start there, because some of the other races really weren't races. You know, they just weren't. So what about the referendums? What do you make of those?
Yeah, well, actually, Tuesday was a very good night for referendums across the state. There were 29 referendums, and 2/3 of them, 19 of them passed.
Wow.
And there were even referendums for a great deal more money. For example, in Beloit, it was a $70 million referendum on schools. And Beloit's economy is not doing well, and this isn't the kind of environment where you would think a referendum would pass, but it did.
Yeah.
So
did you say 70 million in Beloit? 7-0.
7-0.
Wow.
So we're not talking about small amounts of money.
No, not at all.
Turnout statewide was nothing like the projection. They were talking about 35% or more turnout, and statewide it was less than a quarter, I think 23% turnout, so disappointing there. But in this county it was nearly 40%. Generally, if you have that kind of turnout, you bring out more people who don't have children in school, fewer people employed by the schools, and especially since there was no contest on the Democratic side and you had conservatives, you know, Republicans coming out to vote in their primary, this shouldn't have been a good election for the referendum. Like you, I expected it to pass, but looking at that margin, 69%?
Yeah.
Really impressive.
Well, you know, it was only, you know, well, every referendum for school, were these mostly all school referendums?
Mostly.
Okay. So, I mean, even up until last year, we saw school referendums kind of taking a beating across the state. And for the last few years, since the economy has really been in the toilet, they've been very seldom have they passed. What is that? I know you're not an economist, but I mean, just kind of looking into your own knowledge, what do you think that says?
Well, there are a couple things. One of the things that you look at the polls that Wisconsinites and Americans generally are increasingly optimistic about the economy. And that could be reflected in their willingness to fund schools. also, the schools have really taken a hit. I
Yeah.
mean, the teachers in terms of their pay and benefits. So it could be that some people feel that the schools have taken their share and that something needs to be done to ensure maintenance of quality education.
Do you think that that will then sort of parlay into a successful recall election against the man who did this to those teachers?
Well,
Or is that going to be a tougher?
you know, that's going to be a tougher nut. I mean, in that case, most people have a fairly strong position about Walker either way.
Yeah.
And right now it looks like a dead heat, very few undecided. We'll be probably seeing millions spent to move 2% one way or the other. And all the ugly robocalls that we saw some of in this primary, we're going to see a lot more of that and then some.
Not me at my house. I've already taken precautions. But yeah, I mean, well, those started they've been an annoyance to me for the last couple of years. But you know, when it really started coming to a head was the first round of senatorial recall elections. It was just too much, you know. And this time around, I just said that's enough. So, okay, well, let's and we can talk a little bit about the governor's recall election in a little bit. But okay, so the school board race and the council race. Really, there weren't a whole lot of candidates, period, that turned out. And in the council race, there were only 4 people, and there were 3 seats up. All 3 incumbents were reelected. I was kind of surprised at the number of signs that these people put up around town.
That they actually were campaigning
Yeah,
for
yeah. I mean,
an election
when-
that was, you know, you have one perennial candidate
Yep.
and 3 incumbents.
Yeah, so that kind of surprised me a little bit. School board, you know, again, 5 people running for 3 seats. Any thoughts on that race?
Well, the Northwestern thought there was so little difference between the candidates that they didn't even make an endorsement. And if you look at the stances, I mean, clearly the Wisconsin Education Association and the unions, you know, endorsed 3, but they could have easily endorsed the other candidate as well, one of the other 4. I mean, so not terribly exciting there. And what you did see, though, was, I think, a protest vote for the 5th candidate. He runs regularly for a variety of offices, this time 3 offices, and he never does that well. And I think that reflects, you know, some conservatives who, you know, were casting a protest against the people and the policies that they saw on the board.
Yeah. You know, the one that kind of surprised me was Jared Erdman running for school board. You know, now here's a guy, first time running for any kind of an office whatsoever. And when I saw that the school board or the school referendum for Oaklawn was doing so well, you know, Jared was, you know, very big in this group to get Oaklawn passed, and I really thought that that involvement might help carry him across the finish line as a victor. But it didn't happen that way. Do you see that as interesting or not?
Well,
really?
Kelly Saganak is a faculty member at my university in the College of Education. So I think that gives her inside track in the link with you know, the schools and whatnot. And she's a first-time candidate too. And she actually ran above one of the incumbents, another professor from my university.
And that does, and we've talked about this a little bit before, and Dan and I talked about it with the candidates too. That's a concern of both Dan's and mine, and I know a lot of people in the community are concerned about the fact that 3 of the 7 school board members are now university, you know, professors. And,
Right. And
that's
another
a problem, I think.
The leading candidate is married to a university professor.
I think that's a problem. And I guess we're going to see how it all pans out in the long run. Dan did send in, gave me some questions, one in particular. Now, he wonders if the obvious stamp of approval of the city manager by the current council and many in the public is why some people are not running for council. You know, I mean, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we'd see a fair number of candidates. I mean, 7 years ago, my gosh, there were 20-some candidates in the primary. You just don't see candidates with those kinds of numbers now in primaries. But you know, what do you think that people are just so happy with the job that Mark Roloff is doing that they're just not feeling that they need to run?
Another faculty member in our college, Carl Nolenberger, has done citizen satisfaction surveys, and I think those surveys, you know, have shown a relatively significant level of satisfaction. There haven't been major issues in the city that would cast, you know, pale over the city manager, and he's made some decisions that were popular. I don't think our inspection department has ever been popular, especially with landlords or property owners, and you know, removing those two people probably was a popular move, and he's made some other moves that. And I think the last mayor race, where Burke Tower won more narrowly than I expected, but you know, that seemed to take some of the air out of the sail of some of the you know, opposition.
Well, conversely, you know, the school district didn't have a lot of people running either, and yet the district, unlike the city, is very, very dysfunctional. And so, you know, it kind of is weird. It's a weird paradigm when you think, okay, maybe people aren't running for city council because they're so happy with the way things are and there aren't these major issues. And yet, by the same token, then, if that were to be holding true, you would think that there would be a lot of people running for school board because it's such a mess over there. But that's not happening either.
Given the situation, I mean, would you want to run for the school board?
No.
I mean, you're
No.
Of course not. I mean,
No.
you know, I think part of the referendum was the fact that people can relate to the fact that there's a building that's falling down. It's unfair to the students, the schools. There could have been planning. There might have been alternatives, but none developed. And I think that many people also are concerned that, well, if we close this place down, that means they'll be moving all these kids to our schools and what have you. And that, I think, resonated. It's a difficult job being on the school board, because the fact is, this might have been a relatively easy vote, but anytime you threaten to close down a school or to change the boundaries, you get a show of parents who come up, and any plan that you have seems to, the board backs away. And particularly if you have school board members who are especially friendly to education in the schools and want to do well by it, and then they're forced with tough decisions of making cutbacks and downsizing and redistricting. You know, there have been several efforts by, you know, more conservative candidates to win majorities on the school district, and they managed to do it relatively briefly. But generally what you have is one or two people who are critical but don't have enough votes to make any significant effect on school policy.
Well, I just find the shift in attitude to be quite different. I mean, last year at this time we were hearing, you know, throw out the incumbents and you know, put new people on this school board in particular and that kind of thing. And this
Cheryl, you hear the same kind of thing with Congress.
Yeah.
Everyone hates Congress. Congress is in, you know, 12, 11, 13% approval rating. Everybody's talking about the anti-incumbency. And the fact is that over 90% of the incumbents are reelected.
Yeah.
And that will happen again this year.
Apathy, voter apathy. Anything else that you wanted to kind of talk about with regard to the local races?
I suppose what I would talk about would be the Republican primary. I mean, I think Wisconsin, you know, I didn't think it would be significant. I thought that the race would be more or less concluded, particularly when they shifted the primary back to April. but it looks like if Illinois wasn't the final nail in the coffin for Rick Santorum, then Wisconsin certainly was. He was already in a position where he wasn't going to put together enough delegates to prevent a plurality from Mr. Romney. But the interesting thing is looking at the votes statewide, and I was hoping to have the numbers for Winnebago County, because if you look at the statewide, Mr. Romney did especially well in the suburbs around Milwaukee and in southeastern Wisconsin, in that media market with conservative talk radio, Sykes and Belling and all that. He won there and almost nowhere else. The upscale, upper income, suburban Republican, first, the turnout in those counties was substantially higher. It was overwhelmingly Romney, and even though Santorum carried most of the rest of the state, I mean, I'm only counting 20-some counties out of 72 for Romney, and the rest of the state, northwestern Wisconsin, southwestern Wisconsin, northeastern Wisconsin, he carried Winnebago County in the Fox Valley, which is the only county he carried, and then narrowly. And I'm guessing that it would be fairly similar. Romney's vote is the larger cities, not Green Bay, but I'm guessing Oshkosh and especially strong in West Haven, and in the downscale, lower income, the so-called Kmart, Walmart Republican, more conservative, more religious, more small town and rural. That demographic held up really well in Wisconsin, and I'm sure if you looked at the voting totals in Winnebago County, you would find the same pattern. And long term, that's kind of interesting because it reflects a kind of division in the Republican Party of those people who are relatively well off, are concerned about economic issues, particularly when it comes to taxes and business and what have you, and the social issues are not really central to them.
Okay, good. What do you make of all the legal wrangling, even up until a week before the election, over the voter ID bill? I mean, I think we all knew that no Supreme Court justice or no other court was going to make a decision with a week or less to go before the election, because then you'd have the issue of what do you do with all those absentee ballots that have already been cast where people did not have to show an ID. But still, I mean, all this nonsense a week or less before the election.
It's kind of interesting because I have never heard so much discussion about activist judges. And that's true on the right when it comes to Walker and the state Republicans complaining about activist judges intervening in issues like voter ID. But then at the national level, you have President Obama complaining about an activist court that may well knock down either all or parts of the health care legislation that was enacted. I mean, no one likes an activist court when it's intervening in ways that you don't like.
Right, exactly. Well, we don't like anything when it happens, and we don't like it, or we're not for it. Well, the governor's recall election is for sure a go now. No big surprise there. What is your take on the Democratic challengers? We've got Kathleen Falk, we've got Tom Barrett, now our Secretary of State, Doug LaFollette is,
Kathleen Vino?
Yep. So, you have any thoughts on any of those candidates so far? And there's still maybe more before this is all over.
I'm sure that there will be some minor figures. I'm guessing that to run an effective statewide race, I think probably Falk can do that because she's gotten some of the major union endorsements, and Tom Barrett clearly can do it. Doug and Vino, I just don't see them mobilizing the kind of campaign that's going to be successful. I think that might only happen if the campaign between Falk and Barrett became so negative that would benefit a third candidate. But I think the Democrats may have an agreement that they're not going to do that to each other. Well, who knows? It might happen anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
But, Falk has run 3 statewide campaigns and, not won nominations. Barrett has run before and at least, been nominated by his party for governor. And the polls show him having something of an advantage against Mr. Walker. And I think the Democrats are so anxious to regain the governorship that they'll take the candidate who's most likely to win it back. And I think that's probably Barrett.
Yeah. Well, what about those running against Lieutenant Governor Kleefisch? I don't know their names as well as we know the ones running against Walker, but I know one is an African-American president of a local firefighters union. So he's got, presumably the minority vote and the union vote in his area, for sure, I would think. But I don't know the other candidates. And again, I'm sure that there will be more who, throw their hat in the ring before this is all over. But any thoughts on that race at all so far? Too early to tell, really.
Have any thoughts about that? I suspect that since they combined the election of governor and lieutenant governor, no one, and taken most of the functions away from the lieutenant governor, that very few people care about that race. It's just in the recall that these are going to be separate.
And that's and that's why people should care, because we conceivably, as Dan and I talked about when you were on the show the last time, we very well could end up with a Democratic governor and a Republican lieutenant governor, or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Yeah, and it becomes important.
That's going to be a hell of a mess.
It usually becomes only important when the governor has to step down for whatever reason, which sometimes happens.
It's going to be a kettle of fish if there's a problem.
Sure.
So people really should think about that.
But they're probably not
I've never heard of anything so stupid, though, as to separate them. When they run as a team.
Yeah, you would think, but.
I don't know. That's weird. Gordon Hintz is going to be on in the next segment, and maybe this is a question that we should ask him, that obviously something needs to be changed in the way the state law is set up, that this just can't happen,
Well, we've seen, too, that not only the way the law is worded, but the way it's interpreted, because the Government Accountability Board and lawyers on each side of the issue have found very creative ways to interpret the same language. So,
I just kind of a funny, humorous sort of little observation. I was talking with, a friend the other day, and she was talking about her grandson, and the two of them were chatting about politics to the extent that a young kid can talk about politics. But he made an interesting observation about Governor Walker, and he said, Governor Walker has at least got people paying attention to what's going on. I mean, whether you like what he's done or you can't stand what he's done, he's got people watching what's going on and paying attention and getting involved. And what do they say? Out of the mouths of babes, and there you go.
Well, paying attention, but we have candidates. We do national searches for our jobs, and we bring candidates in. And boy, the image of Wisconsin as cheeseheads and football and beer and has certainly changed. You'll get questions. Well, how close are you to Madison? Are those things going on a regular basis? I mean, it's really adjusted our image, and not in a positive way.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you. I mean, do you ever recall a time in our history where this kind of attention, national media attention, has been thrust on a state politically?
Frankly, if we want to go back in this state's history, and if you look at the progressive era, I mean, and a governor who brought national attention to an experiment in democracy, Bob La Follette. But that's a long time ago. That's, the turn of the 19th century and the early part of that era. And then everyone was looking at Wisconsin and for things like the direct primary, the recall, and all those things that we're talking about now.
Yeah. But in a different way, they were looking at it.
In many ways, much the same way,
really?
because
Okay.
the divisions, not between two political parties, but within one political party. Conservative Republicans and progressive Republicans, leading to a split of the party and producing the election of Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat.
All right. Let's see here. I thought that Dan had submitted another question here, but I can't find it. But kind of continuing along those same lines, then what we were just talking about. Is this what it takes? This kind of disruption in government and people really polarizing themselves against family members in some cases, co-workers and so forth, to get people to keep their eye on what's going on and to become a little bit more involved in politics? I mean, do we have to have this kind of divisiveness in order to get people involved and less apathetic?
Well, Wisconsin is not alone. I mean, the level of polarization in Congress, the level of polarization in other assemblies, and the conflicts in other states between governors and legislatures, and the conflict between voters. I think this is a national phenomenon. Maybe more apparent here because of the issue which many people consider a right, the right to petition your government in the case of a recall, the right freedom of association, which those who think collective bargaining falls under that right, and those on the other side who feel that this is simply a privilege that unions have taken advantage of. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground on this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to have you back again when there's another election, and that
hopefully one that's more competitive.
I think that will be for sure. Jim, thanks so much. It's always a real pleasure.
Sure.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will be joined by our State Representative Gordon Hintz. We'll be right back.
You just take a look at this. I mean, Santorum carries the...
Wow.
Every year, the U.S. Department of the Treasury receives about 1.4 million reports of problems with paper checks. Checks can be lost, stolen, or delayed. If you still receive Social Security payments by paper check, Treasury wants you to know about a safer, more convenient way to get your money: the Direct Express Prepaid Debit MasterCard. The Direct Express card is new and is available to anyone receiving Social Security benefits, even if you don't have a bank account. Your monthly benefits will be automatically placed onto your card account each month on the day your money is due. While other debit cards cost money, it is possible to use the Direct Express card for free to make purchases, pay bills, and get cash at thousands of locations nationwide. There are no sign-up or monthly account fees. No more waiting for the mail or worrying about lost or stolen checks. Call 1-877-212-9991 or visit www.usdirectexpress.com.
back to the second half of Oshkosh. Gordon Hintz, our state representative for the 54th Assembly District, is joining us now. Very happy to have you back, as we always are. You know, we wanted to have you come in, and Dad's not here, obviously, but he wanted you to come in too. So, you know, it's been a really eventful last couple of years, in particular the last year and 3-4 months. So we want to talk about some of that and just kind of do a legislative review if we can. We'll call it that for lack of a better word. Biggest thing, of course, is the collective bargaining. You know, it's still amazing to me, Gordon, to see that there are so many people out there who still seem to think that stripping away collective bargaining rights from union workers was necessary in order to balance the budget. You know, I mean, you can see it in the media all the time that, as it turns out, that wasn't necessary, and yet there are still these people out there, God love them, that just think it was absolutely necessary and it was the right thing to do because Lord knows that balance would have been not budgeted, not balanced without it. You know?
Yeah, and I think, well, one, it's good to be back. And happy to be in Oshkosh and Madison less. I think the start to the year last year, especially starting with that, the way it was done, sort of changed the entire legislative session. But now is actually a great opportunity to be discussing what the impacts of the loss of collective bargaining have done. If you talk to a lot of our state employees in our corrections system at Winnebago, at the Wisconsin Resource Center, or talk to our public school teachers right now, the uncertainty, the relationship that used to be more of a partnership, the sole reason that you had these sort of arrangements, not just about how you were going to be treated as an employee, but what the rules were going to be, especially in a situation like the prison, has changed dramatically. What was once a partnership is now going back to be more adversarial, even between people who get along, because of the nature and the way things have changed. Now, some of the flexibility with work rules has allowed management to have some, flexibility that they thought was going to lead to things like reduced overtime and other things that they wanted to address that I think probably could have been addressed other ways. But they're seeing that there's unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. They can't get anybody to sign up for voluntary overtime. The electrician that is no longer available on a Saturday, so they have to hire a part-time private contractor who's not familiar with the system, who costs 3 times as much. So there are these unintended consequences. And I think for people that were never familiar in the first place about why we sort of had this working relationship and why you would have it, people tended to focus on the union side or the political side or the money side. We're seeing some of those consequences, and they've been, detrimental to our workforce.
But by the same token, then, one would say, common sense would tell us, okay, these are unintended consequences that are not good, clearly. So we need to go back and undo some of these things. That's a lot easier said than done, though. And even if, we successfully get Governor Walker recalled and the Democrats take control in Madison again, what really is the likelihood of some of these things being undone?
Well, I think a lot of the decisions that have been done will take a long time if they're going to be undone at all. Health insurance costs are what's driving everything, from a workforce, private sector, public sector, or whatever, and that's been some of the tough part of the labor costs, related to taxpayer-funded public services. But I thought if we had someone who was trying to govern, who was trying to work on reducing the cost of public employees, I thought we might see some changes to arbitration that we have at the local level, in talking to people. There were things that the School Boards Association and the League of Cities had pushed for that would give them, they thought, more flexibility, but they never asked. There were no groups who do this for a living, even on the other side, who were saying that you should repeal this. It's a lot easier to have a happier, more productive workforce, I don't care who you are, if you have people involved in the decision-making processes and the rules for how they're going to be governed. And so maybe that's what is the build back up. Maybe we recognize what the biggest flaws or what's been lost in these areas, and you look at, bringing some of those rights back.
And help us clear up something here, Gordon. We're taping this on the 5th of April. Just in, this last week, there is a small section of that collective bargaining rule that was ruled unconstitutional. But I think there's a lot of people out there, especially within the private sector, to whom this is, it affects them, who are unclear as to really what was ruled unconstitutional and what it means to them. Can you maybe, in layman's terms, explain it, or is that the impossible dream too?
I got the decision like everybody else, and I probably a week ago could rattle it off. I'll admit to this second, not quite being able to. And it seems like every major decision that we've had over the last year has been followed by an immediate lawsuit, and then a judge ruling that something was unconstitutional
And that
or
doesn't say much for
inappropriate.
Governor Walker.
No, I mean, if it's been done, it's been done poorly, it's been done sloppily, and it seems to be done for the wrong reasons. Either it's an overreach or a power grab, or there's some unethical, potentially illegal behavior in there. As I understand it, usually whatever happens, both sides beat their chests about what it's about, but I think it was, had to do with people's rights to have their dues collected. And I forget the other part of it, but narrow things, but it did undermine the integrity of what was done.
Okay. Want to talk about some other things. Obviously we're going to be having, a recall election for Governor Walker, in large part because of the way he's done things. But I have to just kind of make an editorial comment here on the ads that we saw during the first round of senatorial recall elections. Ones that were put out, I believe they were put out by the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce Foundation. Just such blatant lies. I mean, they had this grandmotherly looking woman saying, oh, for the first time in years, Wisconsin now has a balanced budget. I just wanted to spit up when I heard those ads, because nothing could be further from the truth. It's in our Constitution that every biennium budget must be balanced.
That's correct.
So, Gordon, where do they get off making comments like that, putting ads out like that, and nobody seems to be challenging them? Certainly people from the Government Accountability Board saw those ads. They were run statewide.
Yeah, and I think the truth is something that, especially in these times, can be subjective, and we've never, as many people are upset about the amount of money being spent, it's been difficult to legislate good taste as well.
But that goes beyond good taste. Really.
It goes beyond good
I
taste.
Mean, that's just a flat-out lie.
And there are many things that I gnash my teeth at, where it seems that some of the things being said in some of the governor's ads are the opposite. Or in a lot of the Senate recalls, you saw ads put forward by some of the pro-school privatization, school voucher groups that were talking about Luther Olson's record on public education. In other words, here was a group that was directly investing in the future privatization of schools that was talking about public schools. Now, that's not a lie, but to me, it reeks in terms of the snow job they're trying to pull on the public. We've had, PolitiFact has gotten more attention in terms of the service they're doing on, trying to refute claims or split hairs on, truth or not. Usually in these ads, you see the very small asterisk in print saying, well, balanced budget meaning, something beyond a balanced budget. So, they're making it, part of it is, I think, just to blur, either turn people off so much that they turn their TV off. I'm always convinced, because it's like the robocalls, you just hang up. But I think a lot of the time just trying to make it so you can't tell who really is got a balanced budget or who really is better on in the economy by just throwing mud at the board.
Yeah. Well, and then there are some people, unfortunately, who just don't know. They don't really know what the meaning of a lie really is. I mean, it's when you purposefully speak an untruth. And I think that's what these ads are doing. I mean, if you're just making an honest mistake, that's one thing. That's not a lie. Right. But these ads clearly were lies.
Or they, there's, I could go on.
We could go on just on that, couldn't we? Well, let's talk about, some of the other things that, have come out of this administration. Now, just today, I received a news alert that the capital cost cleanup is only going to be about $200,000, which is far less than the, $7.5 million, something like that.
It only seems to be going down. It sort of got whittled down to 200,000.
I mean, it just, that's another stretching of the truth by the Walker administration. I mean, and there are so many different examples. Someone on the Northwestern's website the other day, it was not one of their employees, it was a commenter. He really did a fine job, I thought, of just stating every single misinformation, lie, untruth, whatever you want to call it, that has come out of this administration. And, I think all those things are very likely. I mean, that's one of the reasons that so many people signed recall nomination papers. And I think that is all going to come back to bite him, every bit of it, even if he survives a recall election.
I mean, I think on a lot of these things, whether it's bills or laws that are written poorly, that aren't, we should really be intentional with what we're doing. Or maybe someone made the comment that the capital costs were $7.5 million, and it wasn't, they just kind of threw the number out there. But alone, yes, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But you're right. I mean, time after time, it seems like it's either been sloppiness or just blatant distortions of the truth that I think do undermine the credibility of our entire government, and help makes the public lose confidence, and probably and then one side gets defensive and the other side gets mad, and it kind of repeats itself.
Well, it's a cumulative thing. I mean, I think we all can overlook and forgive one or two little things along the way. When you look at the totality of a person's body of work or what have you. But when it's one thing on top of another on top of another, then that becomes, it's a pattern, and it really has to have some scrutiny.
And that's impacted, starting off the way we did last year, really impacted, the trust level, between sides about how things were going to be done.
Sure.
And of course, and then we had the secrecy pledges, and we kind of, every other thing that came out sort of, didn't do anything to restore that.
Right. Some of the big things that happened in Madison this last year, let's say, we've got concealed carry and we've got voter ID bill. Let's talk about voter ID first, since we just finished with an election 2 days ago. That is being wrangled around back and forth in the courts. What is your feeling on the voter ID bill as it stands right now?
Again, if the intention of this had been to actually try to prevent voter impersonation, which is the only kind of fraud or alleged fraud that voter ID can fix, there were certainly better ways to do it. We saw them picking at details. Well, we don't want students to use their IDs. Those government issue IDs are no good. We want to make sure that our elections have integrity, and I think one of the areas that we should have looked at expanding it to was making sure down in Waukesha we have some uniform systems, make sure that we're paying more for training to assist our clerks and others that are having to deal with complicated things like early voting and absentee voting, military overseas balloting. I think there are a number of things we can do to safeguard the election integrity, and if we wanted to safeguard against people impersonating, even though we haven't had many cases, we certainly could have done it. This was a blatant effort to try to discourage, to disenfranchise. I mean, how many people do you know that sort of groaned that even at this point didn't know the rules, no one wants to show up and be told that they can't vote?
Right.
At the end of the day, if it's determined that it is going to be the law going forward, people are going to have to work harder, get educated. I think there was a good effort by the Government Accountability Board and others to try to make sure the word got out about the changes that are made, for whatever reason. But, we've seen this state by state. So many of the biggest decisions that were made this legislative session had everything to do with politics, power, and the 2012 presidential election. And very little to do with what the stated goals were, which was, jobs, the economy, balancing the budget. I mean, you just rattled off. If we were to say, what were the big issues? You'd say, collective bargaining, redistricting, guns, attack on women's health, voter ID, all these big issues, hot button issues. But that's really the accomplishment, which really is the opposite of what the governor came in and said he was going to do.
Well, yeah, and so if we didn't have people confused enough by voter ID, and some of them, how many, I don't know, but I'm sure that there were some people who just said, I can't figure it out, I'm just going to forego the election. Then on top of all that, we did have the redistricting, and a lot of people not really knowing where they were supposed to go vote. I talked to 3 of them yesterday alone, 2 of whom did not vote because they got to the polling place and their district had changed, or their polling
And
place
that's the
had
one
changed.
thing, I mean,
So-
you know, the spring election here, I think, for a lot of reasons, we had increased turnout over normal, but, you know, the one thing people don't understand, I mean, for years, I remember Senator Cole out in Washington's had a bill to have weekend voting, you know, we've always had a thing in Wisconsin where we thought it was a good idea to make it as easy to encourage people to vote, and we've had high voter participation, which is usually a source of pride in Wisconsin. You know, if it rains or if you put additional barriers to someone who's got a family, a busy day, has to get there before work, has to get there after work, at some point, you know, they kept saying, well, you can get a free ID to vote. Well, if someone has to take the bus to get out to the DMV and wait an hour to get their free ID, there's a cost associated with that. It's time, it's inconvenience. And you know, we've seen that the more obstacles you put in the way, or the more, you know, confusing it is, you know, at some point, especially
Yeah.
with the cynicism out there, people just will not do it, and
Yeah.
it's worrisome.
Well, and the comparisons for argument purposes, you know, well, you have to show an ID to get on an airplane. Well, not everybody gets on an airplane, but it's a constitutional right
A movie.
to be able to vote.
Yeah.
And so we need to stop making those ridiculous comparisons.
And again,
'cause there isn't
and I
any.
understood. Look, there are plenty of people on both sides who, you know, want to feel secure that no one is,
Yeah.
even if there's never not been a case of it. And I get that, and I think there are ways that we probably could have addressed that and some of the other issues related to our election systems to make it more accountable without disenfranchising. But that's never what this was really about. I mean, we passed the most repressive, you know, worse than Indiana's, and a number of the amendments we tried on the floor were aimed at both improving it, but also highlighting that they had no intention of even addressing these things. You know, the DMV that offers free IDs in some parts of the state, they're only open, you know, a couple days a month. Well, you know, yes, they can get a free ID, but now you've really made it, you know, difficult. So we'll see what happens, you know, legally with those things.
Yeah.
But Wisconsin is not alone in that.
Concealed carry, that was the other huge thing that happened this last year. I realize that just about every state in the union has concealed carry. How does ours, Gordon, compare with other states?
Yeah, we have one of the most open conceal and carry laws. If you remember, before I was elected, the legislature had passed conceal and carry legislation that Governor Doyle had vetoed, and then there was an override vote, and it was pretty contentious. That was one that required training, that you know, had some protections in place for law enforcement, and others. It was more like what Minnesota has. Ours is not, you know, open and carry, the wild, wild west that I forget how many states have, but it is pretty open. And you saw the debate over, well, it doesn't say how many hours of training you have. Is an online video enough? You know, I think most of us were pretty comfortable given the experience of states that had, you know, had these laws that you know, both sides sort of overreact. People aren't going to start shooting each other, nor is the world automatically going to become a safer place necessarily. But I understand the issue. I understand the peace of mind it brings some people. But I think we really should be intentional with the laws that we write. You know, when the chief of police and the sheriff and the district attorney are saying, you know, this says you can have an uncased weapon laying in your passenger seat when you're driving, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I thought that is crazy. You know, why would we write something that, you know, that reckless? I mean, the responsible gun owners who are most likely to want to have a concealed weapon are already going to have the training and the other things that are required. It's sort of these newbies that, you know, feel like because it's passed, they have to run out and go ahead and do it. So I think there was a bill out there that a lot more people would have supported that would have been better. You know, that being said, you know, I don't expect the world to change dramatically, but God forbid that we do have an incident. Again, it's not an excuse that we should be writing laws that are sloppy or unintentional to please, you know, people that sort of abuse the definition of the Second Amendment or, you know, the gun lobby. So, you know, we're here. The world hasn't come to an end. Maybe that's something that if, you know, law enforcement and others, advocates want to tighten up, you know, you could consider in the future. But you know, I think that's another one where the public education campaign has been pretty pretty good to make up for a bad law.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about schools. Obviously, one of the big things too in this last session was charter schools, school vouchers, and cuts to public education. So, give us a recap of what we are facing as a result of those changes.
I mean, this one is. There are a few things that Republicans and Democrats in Wisconsin may have had different ideas on, but traditionally we have, all parents of all stripes, care about public education. And we have had a system in Wisconsin that has been one of the best in the country. We've had some tough budgets that we've had to go through to try to balance those things. When we were in the majority, we cut funding for K-12 education. We are in an area where we probably need to look at, being creative. We have seen some very effective charter schools within the school districts out there reaching new kids, and I think that's the kind of measured creativity that we needed to see. But we saw the biggest cuts in the country, effectively $1.6 billion to K-12 education. We've seen an absolute assault on morale. When you talk to teachers now, they're sort of, especially ones that have been in the system for 20 years, are nowhere near retirement, are wondering what's going to happen if they're going to lose their, WRS, retirement system, and now go to a 401k. But to see at the same time that we've expanded taxpayer funds for voucher schools and we've raised the income limits. In Milwaukee, there was a cap on the number of students that could enroll, and you had to be of a certain income. Well, they raised the income limits, and kids that were already paying for private school are now just getting taxpayer funds. So there were no new students, really, that were getting an opportunity. I mean, the choice program was always advertised as, we're going to give these low minority, poor kids a chance to go to school, and instead you're taking kids that were already paying private tuition and we're giving them a taxpayer voucher, and you're undermining an already struggling school district at the same time. This wasn't about public education or improving education or competition. This was the beginning of an attempt, I think, to really dismantle what we have and then to point at, public schools and say, see, they can't do it, after you've essentially starved them to death. It's a real conversation that we need to have. It shouldn't be as politicized as it has been. That was the one shocking thing, was just the outright assault on public educators. I never make assumptions that all teachers are Democrats or, because they're, teaching in our schools. I mean, most people are not motivated for the pay and benefits, but like legislators, usually because they want to serve. And now you've kind of thrust them into the spotlight, called them the haves, and undermined, the integrity of the career. I think a lot of people are worried about whether they want to stay into teaching or whether they want to go into teaching, and then you're looking at privatizing charters, expansion of virtual education and for-profit education, and Wisconsin became sort of a petri dish for somebody's experiment, which again, we were going to have tough decisions anyway, given the challenges of the recession, but this goes well beyond that, and I'm not sure who it serves, but it's certainly not to the benefit of kids in our state.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time here, and I want to touch. There were many things.
Speed round.
There were many things I wanted to touch on, but let's talk about women's health real quickly. There have been a lot of cuts there, and women's health is really in great danger.
Not just cuts in traditional Medicaid programs, but ideological cuts here in Winnebago County. We had the Planned Parenthood coordinators who administered the cancer screening program that were eliminated. They had their funding cut for no other reason than they don't like Planned Parenthood. Our clinic doesn't do any abortion services. The money can't go for those things. But we've also seen our county, along with other counties, penalized. If Planned Parenthood is the provider of some of the women's health, screening and reproductive health services. In other words, if you're a woman in Marathon County, there'll be state funding for you. If you're a woman in Winnebago County, your funding has been reduced for no other reason than this extremist attack on Planned Parenthood, who is the #1 women's health provider in the country. That's there is no other private entity that's lining up to serve low-income women. And it's really, when you put politics before people's, public health, you really got to ask what's going on.
Okay. The mining bill, I want to leave that.
Could do a whole show on that.
I know, that's why I don't want to get into it. A couple of things. Landlord-tenant laws have changed, and because there is obviously a big university here, this is going to affect a lot of students and their landlords. Tell us a little bit about how the landlord-tenant laws have changed.
Yeah, it is bad for tenants, good for landlords. I think a lot of landlords that are responsible aren't going to go through this, but be harder for people to get their damage deposit back. Less of a legal recourse to get it back. If you are at the end of your agreement and you have things in the apartment that for whatever reason you haven't had a chance to get out, it immediately becomes the possession of the landlord, as I understand, quicker, than it did before, and they have the right to do whatever they want with it. So, I do think of communities like ours and like Madison and others where you may have first-time renters, seasonal renters, neighborhoods with some dilapidated housing. It was unnecessary except to enable probably some of the bigger slumlords around, meaning, maybe it would provide some benefit to, an example that a responsible landlord, an additional burden that they don't like. But this didn't come through a committee that I was serving on, but, it kind of moved quickly at the end of session as a real priority for some. And, some raised the fact that there are a lot of legislators that own a lot of property and maybe that's why it was a priority. But there's a real concern that it puts tenants at a significant disadvantage.
Okay, so what about their security deposit? I mean, how has that specifically changed?
Well, as I understand now, when you try to get your security deposit, there are, they've removed the deterrent of automatic double damages, court costs, and attorney fees for stolen security deposits. So, you're talking about a tenant would have to pay $96 back, and not get that money recouped to try to obtain money. They've put some disincentives in there that make it less likely. And I realize there are agreements where the tenant is certainly at fault in these cases, but this was written pretty one-sided.
Okay. And then home brewing. It's amazing to me how many home brewers there are out there.
This issue won the award for probably most contacts on an issue that I wasn't expecting it. Sometimes it's raw milk or puppy mills. Well, we have a lot of home brewers in this area. The Department of Revenue in 2010 sort of made a decision that you couldn't transport your own beer that you made at your house outside of your house, even to share it or for any other reason. And so the law needed to be fixed. It says that you can't sell it or distribute it. It limits it to a large amount in terms of what you can produce. But it was largely, you're seeing it expanding. A lot of people are, brewing their own beer, and there's a lot of clubs and unique groups. One of the issues I need to see resolved, I know with Blues and Brews, here we have a lot of people that donate their home brew, and it may impact that because I don't think it addressed that could be used for that purpose.
Okay, all right. Very good. We're out of time already. Wow.
Hey,
there's just never
no
enough.
shortage, absolutely.
No,
well,
there isn't. Anyway, thanks so much for being here. And that's going to do it for us. We will see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.